Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. My pinky finger went missing on a Tuesday morning, and nobody believed me. I know how that sounds. Trust me, I've heard all the jokes by now. But I need you to understand something before I continue. I'm not talking about phantom limb syndrome or some psychological condition. I physically lost my pinky finger, in a way that only I could see. Picture this. You wake up, stretch your arms above your head, and feel that satisfying pop in your spine. You stumble to the bathroom, brush your teeth while scrolling through your phone, and then you notice your left hand looks wrong. Not injured, not bleeding, just incomplete. That's how it started for me. If you're still listening, I need you to do something for me. Look at your hands right now. Count your fingers. Remember that feeling of having 10, because once you start losing pieces of yourself that nobody else can see, you'll never take that completeness for granted again. Before we dive into my story, hit that subscribe button, not because I'm asking, but because by the end of this, you're going to have questions. Questions I can only answer in the comments, if I still have fingers left to type with. The story starts now. I worked, as a graphic designer in downtown Seattle. Pike Place Market was my daily coffee stop, and on that particular Tuesday morning in October, I stood in line at the original Starbucks like I had 1,000 times before. The barista, Maya, knew my order by heart. Triple shot Americano, no room. "Morning, Jordan," she said, already reaching for the cup. "The usual?" I nodded, fumbling for my wallet. That's when I really noticed it. My left hand, 4 fingers. 4 perfectly normal fingers and a thumb. No scar, no wound, no pain, just absence. "You okay?" Maya asked, and I realized I'd been staring at my hand like an idiot. Yeah, What could I say? My pinky finger vanished overnight? Just tired. She handed me my coffee, and I watched in fascination as my 4-fingered hand wrapped around the cup. The weight distribution felt off. Everything felt off. But Maya didn't react. Nobody in the crowded coffee shop gasped or pointed. To them, I looked completely normal. I spent the rest of that day testing it, holding up my hand to coworkers. High five! Watching them slap all 5 fingers they apparently saw. Taking selfies showed a normal hand in every photo. But when I looked down, 4 fingers. When I touched my hand, I felt the empty space where my pinky should be. By evening, I'd almost convinced myself I was having some kind of breakdown. Stress from the Morrison account deadline, too much caffeine, not enough sleep. I made an appointment with my doctor for the next day and tried to forget about it. But that night, lying in bed in my Capitol Hill apartment, I kept running my right hand over my left. 4 fingers. The space where my pinky should be felt smooth, like it had never existed at all. I fell asleep counting them over and over. 1, 2, 3, 4. The next morning, I woke up missing a toe. Dr. Sarah Chen had been my physician for 3 years. She was thorough, patient, and had never made me feel crazy for my occasional health anxiety. But sitting in her examination room that Wednesday afternoon, I watched her face cycle through confusion, concern, and finally, that careful neutrality medical professionals master when they think you're losing it. "Jordan," she said slowly, "I'm looking at your hand right now. I can see all 5 fingers." "But I can't," I insisted, holding up my left hand. "Look, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's it." She gently took my hand, and I felt her fingers trace over the space where my pinky should be. To her, she was touching my finger. To me, she was touching empty air. What about my foot? I pulled off my shoe and sock. Second toe, left foot, gone. She examined my foot carefully, pressing between each toe. I felt her touch the gap, but her expression never changed. All 5 toes are present and accounted for. The tests came next: blood work, neurological exams, a referral to a psychiatrist that I knew I'd never use, because I wasn't imagining this. The way my balance shifted when I walked, the way my shoe felt loose. These were real physical changes. That night, I did something I'm not proud of. I called my ex, David. We'd broken up 6 months earlier, but he was the only person I could think of who might not immediately assume I was insane. "You want to run that by me again?" His voice crackled through my phone as I paced my living room. Body parts. Disappearing. But only I can see it, or not see it, you know what I mean. A long pause. "Jordan, are you using again?" "That was 5 years ago, David. You know I've been clean." I know, sorry." Another pause. "Look, why don't you come over? We can talk about it." But I couldn't. Because as I stood there, phone pressed to my ear with my right hand, I watched my left ring finger slowly fade away. Not all at once, like being erased by an invisible eraser, joint by joint, until nothing remained. "Jordan, you still there?" I hung up and threw my phone across the room. 3 fingers and a thumb now. 3 toes on my left foot. And the worst part? The absolute worst part was the pattern I was starting to see. It wasn't random. Each missing piece was something I'd damaged before. The pinky I'd broken in college during a stupid drinking game. The toe I'd stubbed so badly during a move that the nail turned black. The ring finger I'd sliced open trying to impress David with my non-existent cooking skills. Every injury I'd ever dismissed, every part of myself I'd damaged and ignored. They were being collected, claimed. By what or whom, I had no idea, but I was about to find out. Thursday morning brought rain. Typical Seattle October weather. And another loss. My left earlobe, which I'd pierced myself with a safety pin in high school despite my mother's warnings about infection. The earring I always wore there had clattered to the bathroom floor when I woke up, no longer having flesh to cling to. I called in sick to work. What else could I do? Sit at my desk, pretending everything was normal while pieces of me disappeared? Instead, I did what any desperate millennial would do. I turned to the internet. The search terms started simple: invisible amputation, body parts disappearing. Can others see missing fingers? Nothing. I dove deeper into medical forums, paranormal websites, obscure Reddit threads. Hours passed in a blur of increasingly unhinged queries. Then, buried on page 17 of a Google search for phantom dismemberment syndrome, I found it. A blog post from 2019, barely 3 paragraphs long. It started with my right thumb, the one I smashed in a car door when I was 7. Woke up one morning and it was just gone, but my wife swore she could still see it. Thought I was going crazy until I found others. We call ourselves the Taken. If you're reading this and you understand, you're not alone. But you need to be careful. The collector doesn't like it when we talk. The post had no comments, no contact information. The blog itself had been abandoned. The last post dated just 2 weeks after the one I'd found. But it was something. A name. The Taken. The Collector. I created a throwaway Reddit account and posted in r/glitch _and_the matrix paranormal, anywhere that might reach someone who understood. Then I waited. The first response came within an hour. A direct message from username PM_ME_your_ghosts. Delete your posts, now. Meet me at Cal Anderson Park, Northwest Corner, 3 p.m. Come alone. Look for the woman feeding crows. I should have been suspicious. Should have thought about safety, about meeting strangers from the internet. But when you're watching yourself disappear piece by piece, conventional wisdom stops mattering. Cal Anderson Park sits in the heart of Capitol Hill, usually packed with dog walkers and ultimate frisbee players. But that drizzly Thursday afternoon, the northwest corner was nearly empty. just an older woman on a bench, tossing breadcrumbs to a murder of crows that seemed unusually organized in their feeding. Jordan. She didn't look up as I approached. How did you? Sit. She patted the bench beside her. And don't look directly at me. Pretend we're strangers sharing a bench. I sat, hyper-aware of my missing fingers as I tucked my hands into my jacket pockets. My name's Linda, she said, still feeding the crows. Lost my first piece in 1987. Right big toe. Broke it playing field hockey in high school. You're one of the taken? She snorted. Stupid name, but it stuck. How many pieces so far? 4. Finger, toe, finger, earlobe, all previously injured. I nodded. That's how it starts. The collector, it feeds on damaged goods. Parts of us we've hurt and healed, scarred and ignored. It takes them back, piece by piece. What is it, the collector? Linda finally turned to look at me, and I bit back a gasp. Her left eye, the socket was smooth, empty in a way only I could see. In my peripheral vision, I caught the shimmer of an eye that others would perceive, but when I looked directly at her. Nobody knows for sure, she said. Some think it's a parasite from another dimension. Others believe it's karma made manifest. Personally, she turned back to the crows. I think it's something that feeds on our relationship with our own bodies. The carelessness, the lack of gratitude. Every time we damage ourselves and shrug it off, we're making an offering we don't even know we're making. How do I make it stop? The crows suddenly took flight, a black cloud dispersing into the gray Seattle sky. Linda stood, brushing crumbs from her coat. You don't. You can slow it down. Be more careful, more mindful. But once the collector notices you, you're marked. It'll take its time, savoring each piece. She pulled out a business card, pressing it into my hand. Support group meets Tuesdays. First Methodist basement on Pine. Don't, she paused. Don't wait too long to come. Some of us don't have much left. She walked away, and I sat there staring at the card. No name, no phone number, just an address and a small symbol I didn't recognize. A spiral made of tiny dots, each one carefully spaced. That night I counted my remaining pieces, documented them in a journal, sketching my gradually diminishing form. And for the first time since Tuesday morning, I felt something other than fear. I felt angry. The First Methodist church basement smelled like burnt coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. Folding chairs arranged in a circle, harsh fluorescent lights, a general atmosphere of barely contained desperation. It could have been any support group in America, except for the people. Linda nodded as I entered that Tuesday evening, 2 weeks and 3 more pieces after our park meeting. I'd lost my right little toe, my left eyebrow, and just that morning, my appendix scar had smoothed away, taking with it the organ I could somehow feel absence of, a hollow space in my abdomen that made me nauseous. Everyone, this is Jordan, Linda announced. First meeting. The 7 people in the circle each raised a hand in greeting, and I catalogued their visible absences. A man missing his entire left ear, a woman with 3 fingers on her right hand. A teenager. God, he couldn't have been more than 19, with patches of scalp showing through where hair would never grow again. Hi, Jordan, they chorused, and I flashed back to every addiction meeting David had dragged me to years ago. Same script, different horror. I took an empty chair between Linda and a middle-aged man who kept rubbing his shoulder, the joint ending in smooth nothing where his arm should have been. Who wants to share first? Linda asked. The stories that followed should have been unbelievable. A woman who'd lost both pinky toes, her belly button, and 6 teeth to the collector. A man missing his right kneecap after a skateboarding accident in his youth. Each tale followed the same pattern. Old injuries returning to claim their due. The thing is, said Marcus, the one-armed man, I've made peace with it. Started seeing it as payment. For all the times I took my body for granted. That's crap, spat the woman with 3 fingers. Denise, I think. We don't owe anything to some interdimensional parasite. It's theft, plain and simple. But what if it's not? The teenage boy, Kyle, spoke barely above a whisper. What if we're the parasites? What if the collector is just reclaiming what was always theirs? The debate that followed was heated but familiar. Acceptance versus resistance. Understanding versus anger. I'd heard it all before in different contexts, but this time... Stop! I stood up, surprising myself. You're all talking about this thing like it's some incomprehensible force, but it has rules, patterns. It takes damaged pieces, old injuries. Your point? Denise asked. What if we could communicate with it? Silence. Then Linda laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Communicate? Jordan, people have tried. The few who claim to make contact. She shook her head. They disappeared. Not just pieces, everything. But they tried alone, right? I pulled out my phone, showing them the document I'd been working on. I've been tracking my losses. Times, dates, which injuries, how old they were. There's a pattern. It's not random. It's methodical, like it's following some kind of schedule. Marcus leaned forward. You think it's intelligent? I think it's collecting with purpose, and if it has purpose, it can be reasoned with. What followed was 2 hours of heated discussion, sharing of data, compilation of experiences. By the end, we had a working theory. The collector wasn't taking randomly, it was taking an order of injury occurrence, starting with the oldest and working forward, like it was reading our bodies like a history book, claiming each chapter of damage. I have an idea, Kyle said as we prepared to leave. But it's dangerous. We all waited. What if we offered it something? Not our bodies, but, I don't know, acknowledgement? Gratitude for the lesson? You want to thank the thing that's dismembering us? Denise's voice dripped skepticism. Not thank, I said, understanding dawning. Acknowledge, what if the collector isn't stealing? What if it's trying to teach us something? Linda grabbed my arm as I headed for the door. Jordan, be careful. The last person who had ideas like yours. Sarah Hendricks, 2021. She thought she could bargain with it. We found her apartment empty, not just of her, of any trace she'd ever existed. Photos, documents, everything. Gone. But I was already forming a plan, because I'd noticed something the others hadn't. Every piece the collector took was something I'd damaged through carelessness or stupidity. Never the injuries that came from living, from taking necessary risks or protecting others. Only the wounds born of negligence. That night, I sat in my apartment with a notebook, cataloging every scar, every healed break, every place I'd ever damaged myself through carelessness. Then, I did something that felt simultaneously insane and absolutely right. I wrote a letter to the collector. I see you. I understand what you're taking and why. Each piece was damaged through my carelessness, my lack of respect for this body I inhabit. I acknowledge the lesson. I accept the teaching. But I need to know what comes next. When you've taken all the carelessly damaged pieces, what remains? And is there a way to coexist without losing everything? I placed the letter on my nightstand and went to sleep. When I woke, the letter was gone. In its place, a single sentence written in handwriting that wasn't quite human. The careful ones keep their pieces. The learners earn them back. Choose. My heart hammered as I read those words. A choice, a chance. But what did it mean? Over the following days, I noticed changes, not returns. My missing pieces stayed gone, but the taking slowed. Where I'd been losing something daily, now days passed with nothing new vanishing. I shared the message with the support group, and hope flickered in eyes that had grown dim. Earn them back, Linda murmured. But how? The answer came from Kyle, of all people. What if we start treating our bodies like they matter, not just avoiding injury, but actively caring? It sounded too simple, too much like every self-help book ever written. But what did we have to lose? We were already losing everything. So we tried. Marcus started physical therapy for his phantom arm pain. Denise took up meditation. Kyle joined a hiking group. And me? I started paying attention, real attention, to every movement, every potential harm, every moment I might have once shrugged off a minor injury. The taking didn't stop entirely. We still lost pieces, mostly old wounds we'd forgotten about surfacing to be claimed. But something else started happening. Reports trickled in from other taken around the country. A woman in Portland woke up to find a previously missing finger had returned. Scarred and imperfect, but there. A man in Austin regained his left earlobe after months of careful living. The collector, it seemed, could give as well as take. But earning pieces back wasn't simple. It wasn't just about being careful. It was about understanding why we'd been careless in the first place. I discovered this 3 weeks after receiving the collector's message. I was at Pike Place Market again, buying flowers for my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, no relation to my doctor, who'd been sick. The flower vendor, an elderly Vietnamese woman named Lin, commented on my missing fingers. "Your hand," she said simply, wrapping the bouquet. "The spirits have marked you." I froze. "You can see it?" She smiled, a knowing expression that made my skin prickle. "I see many things others don't." My grandmother called it the hungry ghost syndrome. Pieces of us eaten by our own negligence. "You know about the collector?" Different names, same hunger. She handed me the flowers. "But you're learning, yes? I can see it in how you move, deliberate, present." That conversation haunted me. Hungry ghosts, it reframed everything. What if the collector wasn't some external entity but something we created ourselves? A manifestation of our disconnection from our own bodies? I brought this theory to the group. The response was mixed. Some found it comforting, others terrifying. The idea that we were doing this to ourselves seemed worse than an outside force. "But that means we have control," Kyle argued. He'd been doing better lately, his remaining hair growing thicker, healthier. "If we created it, we can uncreate it." Linda shook her head. Careful with that thinking. Sarah Hendricks thought the same thing. But I couldn't let it go. I started researching beyond the internet. Old medical journals, anthropology texts, anything about cultural relationships with body integrity. What I found changed everything. There were stories, hundreds of years old, from cultures around the world. The hollow men of medieval England, the peace takers of ancient Japan, the fragmenters referenced in colonial American diaries. Always the same pattern. Careless injury leading to gradual disappearance, seen only by the afflicted. One account from a 1903 Seattle newspaper caught my attention. Local dock worker claims invisible dismemberment plague. Says others similarly afflicted meet monthly at undisclosed location. Authorities suspect opium influence. Over a century ago, in my own city. How long had this been happening? I shared my findings with Marcus after a meeting. He'd been one of the taken the longest, 15 years since his first loss. "There's something I haven't told the group," he said, nursing coffee in a Capitol Hill diner, "about Sarah Hendricks." My pulse quickened. "You knew her?" "We were close, before she disappeared." His remaining hand trembled slightly. "She didn't just vanish, Jordan. She transformed." "What do you mean?" "The last time I saw her, she was barely there. Not just missing pieces, fading. Like an old photograph." She said she'd figured it out. The collector wasn't taking us apart, it was preparing us for something else. Preparing us for what? She called it conscious incarnation. said we were being taught to truly inhabit our bodies by losing the parts we'd never properly claimed. He met my eyes. Then she smiled, said, "See you on the other side," and dissolved right in front of me, not gone, transformed into something I couldn't see anymore. The implications made my head spin. Were we being prepared for some kind of evolution? Or was this just another layer of horror? Not just losing pieces, but eventually losing our entire visible existence. I never got my original pieces back. The pinky finger, the toes, the earlobe, they were gone. Payment for years of carelessness. But 3 months after that first disappearance, I woke to find something new. A scar on my right hand, from a cut I'd gotten helping my elderly neighbor with her groceries, had deepened, become more pronounced, like a badge of honor. A mark of a wound earned through kindness, not carelessness. The support group still meets every Tuesday. We've grown from 7 to nearly 30, taken from across the Pacific Northwest gathering to share stories and strategies. Some nights, new members arrive in panic, freshly marked by their first loss. We help them understand, help them choose, because that's what the collector offers in the end. A choice. Keep living carelessly and it will take everything damaged through negligence or learn, grow. Treat your body like the irreplaceable vessel it is. I still see Dr. Chen every few months. She still can't see my missing pieces, still documents me as physically whole. But last visit she mentioned something interesting. "You've changed, Jordan. You move differently, more deliberately, like you're actually present in your body." If only she knew. Some nights I dream of the collector, not as a monster or thief, but as something else. A teacher, perhaps, or a gardener, pruning damaged branches so new growth can flourish. I wake from these dreams counting my remaining fingers, checking for new losses or unexpected returns. Because here's the thing about losing pieces of yourself that no one else can see. It forces you to really look, to pay attention, to value what remains. So I ask you, the person listening to this in the dark, maybe running your own fingers over old scars, when was the last time you truly appreciated your body? Every finger, every toe, every piece you've damaged and dismissed? The collector is out there, watching, waiting, taking inventory of our carelessness, but it's also waiting for us to learn, to choose, to earn back what we've lost through negligence by living with intention. My name is Jordan Mitchell. I'm 32 years old. I live in Seattle, work as a graphic designer, and I'm missing 7 pieces of myself that no one else can see. But I'm more whole than I've ever been, because now I'm paying attention. And if you've made it this far, if this story resonates in ways that make you uncomfortable, maybe you should start paying attention too. Before the collector decides it's time for your first lesson, check your hands, count your fingers, remember the feeling, and if you wake up tomorrow missing something, you'll know where to find us. Tuesdays, First Methodist basement on Pine. We'll save you a seat, but don't wait too long. Some of us don't have much left to lose. And the careful ones, the learners, we're earning it all back, one mindful moment at a time. Sweet dreams. And don't forget to check the comments. Those of us who've been taken, we tend to find each other there, sharing our counts, our losses, our slow, careful returns. You might be surprised how many of us there are, hiding in plain sight, missing pieces nobody else can see, waiting for you to notice yours are gone too. The thing is, I wasn't special. That's what I need you to understand. I wasn't chosen or cursed or uniquely damaged. I was just another person who'd spent decades treating their body like it was invincible, replaceable, unworthy of careful attention. Think about it. When was the last time you thanked your pinky finger for helping you type? When did you last appreciate your left earlobe for simply being there, making you complete? We don't. Not until it's gone. But here's what the support group taught me. What the collector taught me in its strange, terrifying way. Every scar tells a story. Every healed bone whispers of resilience. Our bodies are museums of our experiences, and we've been sleepwalking through the exhibits. After Marcus told me about Sarah Hendricks, I became obsessed with finding others who'd transformed. Late nights scrolling through archived forums, parsing cryptic posts for clues. I found references, always vague, always secondhand. People who'd lost so much they'd crossed some invisible threshold, but crossed over to what? Then came the night that changed everything. November rain pelted my apartment windows as I cataloged my remaining pieces. The losses had slowed but not stopped. My left middle toe, a patch of skin from my shin where I'd scraped it skateboarding at 12. My body was becoming a patchwork of presence and absence visible only to me and others like me. A knock at my door. Soft, deliberate. Nobody knocked like that. Everyone used the buzzer. I peered through the peephole and saw nothing. Just empty hallway. But the knocking came again, 3 measured taps. "Who's there?" Silence. Then a voice I almost recognized. "Someone who's been where you're going." My hand hesitated on the deadbolt. Every horror movie I'd ever seen screamed, "Don't open the door." But when you're already living in a horror story, I opened it. The hallway was empty. But there was a presence. A shimmer in the air, like heat waves off summer asphalt. And that voice again, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Hello, Jordan. I'm Sarah Hendricks, or I was. May I come in?" What could I say? I stepped aside, and the shimmer moved past me. My living room suddenly felt crowded with invisible presence. "You can't see me," the voice said, definitely female, definitely real. "Not yet. You haven't lost enough to gain that sight. You're..." What? A ghost? Laughter. Surprisingly warm. "No, I'm more present than I've ever been." The collector doesn't take Jordan. It refines. Removes the excess until only truth remains. But people can't see you. People see what they expect to see. A body shaped by carelessness, held together by habit. When those parts are gone, when only the essential remains, we become something else. My couch cushions depressed, as if someone had sat down. I sank into the opposite chair, my mind reeling. Why show yourself to me? Because you're close, closer than you know. And because the group needs to understand, disappearing isn't the end, it's graduation. Over the next hour, Sarah, or the thing that had been Sarah, told me everything. How the final transformations felt. How consciousness expanded when freed from carelessly maintained flesh. How the transformed could see each other, forming a parallel community of the refined. "We're still here," she said, "still part of the world. We just inhabit it differently, more intentionally. Every atom of our being chosen, not defaulted into." "But your family?" "Friends. Mourn an absence, yes. But I'm more present in their lives than ever. I help without being seen. Love without ego. Exist without the weight of careless flesh." Before she left, she gave me a warning. "The choice is coming, Jordan. Soon, you'll lose enough that you'll feel the pull. You can resist, cling to what remains. Or you can let go and become what you were always meant to be. Either path has value, but choose consciously." The shimmer faded, and I was alone. But her words echoed. Choose consciously. I never told the group about Sarah's visit. How could I? Hey everyone, the disappeared aren't gone, they're just invisible and enlightened. But I watched them with new eyes. Noticed how Kyle moved with increasing grace as his losses mounted. how Linda's remaining eye seemed to see more than two ever had. We were all transforming. The only question was whether we'd embrace it or fight it. Me? I'm still choosing. Every day, every careful movement, every grateful acknowledgement of what remains. I've lost 12 pieces now. Gained back 3. All scars from wounds earned through service, not stupidity. My body is a map of lessons learned, prices paid, wisdom earned. And sometimes, just sometimes, I catch glimpses, shimmers in the corner of my eye, the transformed, living their refined lives, waiting patiently for the rest of us to graduate. So I'll ask you one more time, listener in the dark. Check your body, count your pieces, and ask yourself, if you started losing the parts you damaged through carelessness, what would remain? What essential core would emerge? The collector is patient. It has all the time in the world. But you have a choice. Start paying attention now, or wait for that first piece to disappear. Trust me, once it starts, everything changes. Everything. Sweet dreams. And remember, we meet on Tuesdays. Story number 2. The pen moved across the paper without me. 3 jagged words in handwriting that wasn't mine. She's still here. I stared at my left hand like it belonged to someone else. The fingers trembled slightly, still gripping the ballpoint pen I'd been using to fill out a job application. But those words weren't part of any job application, and I hadn't written them. Before you think I'm crazy, let me tell you something. I'm Sarah Chen, 28 years old, graphic designer from Portland, Oregon. I live alone in a studio apartment above a coffee shop called Bean There. I'm right-handed, always have been. My left hand can barely hold a fork properly, let alone write legible words. But there they were, 3 words in neat, old-fashioned cursive. The kind of handwriting you'd see in your grandmother's recipe cards. This is where my story begins. Not with a dark and stormy night or a haunted house on a hill, just me sitting at my kitchen table on a Tuesday afternoon in October, watching my left hand betray me. And now, the story begins. It started 3 weeks after I moved into the apartment. I'd been unpacking boxes all morning when I decided to take a break and work on some freelance projects. My laptop sat open on the small kitchen table, the job application half finished on the screen. I'd grabbed a pen to jot down some notes on paper first. Old habit from art school. That's when it happened. My left hand twitched, just once, like a muscle spasm, but different. Then the fingers curled around the pen I'd set down, picked it up, and started writing. She's still here. The handwriting was beautiful. Perfect loops and curves, the kind they don't teach anymore. My right hand, the one I actually write with, produces chicken scratch that even I can barely read sometimes. I dropped the pen like it was burning. It clattered across the table and rolled onto the floor. "What the?" I whispered to the empty apartment. The old radiator in the corner hissed and clanked. Typical Portland autumn sounds. Outside, rain began pattering against the window. Everything normal, everything except the 3 words on my notepad. I picked up the pen with my right hand and tried to copy the handwriting. Impossible. The curves were too precise, too practiced. Then, because I had to know, I switched the pen to my left hand. Nothing, just my usual awkward grip like a kindergartner learning to write. Maybe I'd imagined it. Stress from the move, too much coffee, bean. There had this incredible dark roast that I'd been drinking way too much of lately. I crumpled up the paper and tossed it in the trash. But 20 minutes later, as I typed away at my laptop, my left hand moved again. This time it reached for a sticky note. I watched, frozen, as my own hand wrote, "The roses need water." I didn't have any roses, I didn't have any plants at all. I'd killed the last succulent my mom gave me within 2 weeks. My phone buzzed, A text from my landlord, Mrs. Martinez. Hey Sarah, forgot to mention, if you see any notes about roses, just ignore them. Previous tenant was a bit odd. Kept talking about her garden, but she lived there for 40 years without any plants. Dementia, poor thing. Previous tenant. I swallowed hard. How long ago did she move out? I texted back. The typing bubble appeared and disappeared several times before the response came. She didn't move out. Passed away in the apartment 3 months ago. Natural causes. I had everything professionally cleaned, don't worry. My left hand was already reaching for the pen again. Not natural. I tried to ignore it at first. Threw away every pen in the apartment. Deleted all the writing apps from my devices, but my left hand found ways. It used my lipstick on the bathroom mirror. He's coming Thursday. It traced words in the steam on my coffee cup. Lock the windows. Once, I woke up to find it had used my finger to write in the dust on my laptop screen. Don't trust the super. The super was Mike, a guy in his 50s who always smelled like cigarettes and WD-40. Seemed harmless enough. He'd fixed my sink the first week without complaint, even though I'd called him at 9 p.m. But after that message, I started noticing things. How he had keys to every apartment but always knocked in a specific pattern. 3 short, 2 long. How he'd stand in the hallway sometimes, not fixing anything, just standing, listening. The messages became more frequent. My left hand would grab anything. Pencils, markers, even my finger and spilled coffee. Always the same elegant handwriting. Always cryptic warnings or observations. The walls remember. Check behind the radiator. He killed the roses. That last one made me pause. Mrs. Martinez had said the previous tenant talked about roses, but she didn't have any plants. I found myself at the Portland Library's local history section, searching through old newspapers. The apartment building used to be a boarding house in the 1960s. Lots of single women lived there. Teachers, nurses, telephone operators. Normal enough for the era. Then I found her, Eleanor Walsh, apartment 3B, my apartment. The newspaper photo showed a woman in her 60s, standing in a garden full of roses. The caption read, "Local teacher wins garden competition, 1968. But the building had no garden, never had according to the records. I dug deeper. Eleanor Walsh, retired elementary school teacher, lived alone, no family. Perfect tenant for 40 years until... My left hand grabbed my phone and typed into the search bar. Eleanor Walsh obituary Portland. Nothing. No obituary, no funeral announcement. Just a brief mention in a police report about an unattended death at my address. That night, my left hand woke me up at 3 a.m. It was writing on my pillow with my finger, tracing the same word over and over. Thursday, Thursday, Thursday. It was Tuesday night. Whatever was coming, I had less than 48 hours. Wednesday morning, I called in sick to my freelance clients and spent the day investigating. My left hand had become more insistent, pulling me toward specific spots in the apartment. Behind the radiator, I found scratch marks on the wall, deep gouges that looked like someone had clawed at the paint. My left hand traced them slowly, then grabbed a piece of paper and wrote, "Trying to escape." The super knocked at my door. 3 short, 2 long. Just as my hand finished writing, "Don't answer." I held my breath. Mike's voice came through the door. "Miss Jen, just checking on that sink. Want to make sure it's still working okay." My sink was fine. He'd fixed it weeks ago. 3 short knocks, 2 long, then footsteps walking away. My left hand wrote, "He does this every Wednesday. Testing. Testing for what?" I wanted to ask, but you can't interrogate your own hand. Trust me, I tried. I'd ask questions out loud, but the responses were always cryptic, always just out of reach of real understanding. That afternoon, I found more clues. A hidden folder tucked behind the water heater contained old photographs. Eleanor Walsh through the decades, always alone, always smiling. But in the background of several photos, roses. Different locations, different years, but always roses. Garden competitions, flower shows, even a rose pinned to her dress at what looked like a retirement party. My left hand suddenly cramped, fingers curling into a fist. When it relaxed, it immediately wrote, "He hated the roses, said they brought rats. Mike, the super." I searched through the building's maintenance records online. Thank God for digitized city archives. Mike Garrett, building superintendent for 15 years. Before that, worked at 3 other buildings. Each one had reported incidents with elderly female tenants, nothing proven, nothing actionable, just a pattern of complaints that ended when the tenants moved out or died. My left hand was writing again, faster now, urgent. Thursday routine, coffee at 7, newspaper at 7:15, unlock at 7:30, always Thursday. I realized with growing horror what Eleanor was trying to tell me. She'd observed Mike's patterns, documented them. But why? Unless the scratches behind the radiator, trying to escape. Every Thursday. My left hand grabbed my phone and navigated to the calendar. I scrolled back 3 months to Eleanor's death. It was a Thursday. Thursday came too quickly. I'd barely slept, my left hand keeping me awake with constant messages. Some were warnings, stay quiet. Others were memories. Roses were beautiful this year, and some were just sad. No one will know. At 6:30 a.m., I positioned myself by the door with my phone recording. My left hand had drawn me a diagram. When Mike made his rounds, where he stopped, how long he listened at each door. 7 o'clock a.m. The smell of coffee drifted up from being there. Mike would be getting his usual black, no sugar, large cup he'd nurse for exactly 15 minutes. 7:15 a.m. The thud of newspapers hitting doorsteps. Mike collected them for the elderly tenants, he said. Such a helpful super. 7:27 a.m. Footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate. My left hand wrote on my palm, now. I heard him stop at Mrs. Goldman's door in 3A. A soft knock, not his usual pattern. The jingle of keys, the click of a lock. My blood ran cold. He was going into apartments. Every Thursday morning, when he knew the routines of every tenant. When the coffee shop noise would cover any sounds. 7:30 a.m. He was at my door. I held my breath, phone camera pointed at the gap under the door. I could see his shadow, hear his breathing. The doorknob turned slightly. Testing. I'd changed the locks. My left hand had insisted on it, writing the same message over and over until I'd called a locksmith. New locks, top and bottom. The doorknob stopped turning. A soft curse. Footsteps moving away. My left hand was writing frantically now. 3C, Mrs. Patterson. Dialysis every Thursday. Mrs. Patterson. 90 years old, lived alone, gone every Thursday morning for treatment. I didn't think, I just moved. Burst out of my apartment and up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. Mike was at 3C's door, key in the lock. "Hey!" I shouted. He turned, and for just a moment his mask slipped. The friendly super vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. Then the smile returned. "Miss Chen, you scared me." "Just checking on Mrs. Patterson's radiator. She mentioned it was making noise." "She's at dialysis," I said. My left hand was painful now, fingers twitching, trying to write warning after warning on my leg through my jeans. "I know," Mike said. "Best time to fix things without disturbing her." We stared at each other. He still had his hand on the key. "I'll come with you," I said. I've been meaning to introduce myself to her anyway. His jaw tightened. "No need. Quick fix. I insist." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, he pulled the key out of the lock. "Another time, then," he said. His smile was all teeth. "Have a good day, Ms. Chen." He walked past me, down the stairs. 3 short steps, 2 long. A pattern. Everything with him was a pattern. I waited until I heard the front door close, then ran back to my apartment. My left hand was already writing. "He knows, you know." That afternoon, I went to the police with everything. The photos, the patterns, the mysterious deaths across multiple buildings. They took my statement with the kind of polite disinterest reserved for people who sound crazy. "Ma'am," the officer said, "you're saying your left hand told you all this?" I tried to explain about Eleanor, about the messages, but I could see how it sounded. A stressed young woman, new apartment, overactive imagination. They said they'd look into it, but I knew that tone. The file would sit on someone's desk until it got filed away or lost. But something must have stuck, because the next morning, Mike wasn't at work. The building management company sent a temporary super, a cheerful woman named Rosa, who didn't have any suspicious patterns or master keys to apartments she shouldn't enter. I never found out what happened to Mike, whether the police actually investigated, whether he just moved on to another building, another set of vulnerable tenants. Sometimes patterns break, sometimes they just shift to where we can't see them. My left hand still writes sometimes, less urgent now, more peaceful. Messages about the weather, reminders to water the small rose bush I planted on my fire escape. Illegally, but Rosa hasn't said anything. Sometimes, late at night, it writes recipes in that perfect cursive. Chicken pot pie, apple cobbler. The kind of things a retired teacher might make. Last week, it wrote something new. "Thank you for listening." I wrote back, with my right hand in my terrible handwriting, "Thank you for warning me." There was no response, but I like to think Eleanor smiled. The rosebush is blooming now. Beautiful red roses that shouldn't grow this well in a Portland autumn, in a tiny pot on a fire escape. But they do. My left hand doesn't write about them. It doesn't need to. Some things don't need words. But here's what still keeps me up at night. If Eleanor could reach through somehow, use my left hand to warn me. How many others are out there? How many voices go unheard because no one's listening? How many patterns go unnoticed because we're too busy, too distracted, too willing to believe in coincidence? Sometimes I walk through the building and wonder about the other tenants. The ones who lived here before, the ones who left suddenly or didn't leave at all. My left hand twitches sometimes when I pass certain doors. Just a little, just enough to make me wonder, but it doesn't write about them. Not yet. If this story gave you chills, if you're looking at your own hands differently now, leave a comment below. Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? Something that saved you? And hey, if you want to hear more true encounters with the unexplainable, hit that subscribe button. Because sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones that could happen to any of us. Sleep tight. 2 weeks after Mike disappeared, my left hand started writing new names. Margaret Fielding. 2B, 1987. I was in the middle of designing a logo for a local bakery when it happened. My left hand just took over, pushed aside my stylus and grabbed a pencil. Dorothy Chen. 4A, 1993. Susan Blackwood. 1C, 2001. Names, apartments, years. A list that grew longer as my hand moved across the page, that perfect cursive flowing like water. Jennifer Santos, 3A, 2009. Mrs. Goldman lived in 3A now. Had been there for 5 years, she'd told me. Which meant Jennifer Santos. My right hand was shaking as I opened my laptop and started searching. Jennifer Santos, Portland, 2009. The results made my stomach drop. Local woman, 34, found dead in apartment. Carbon monoxide suspected. But the building had electric heat. No gas, no carbon monoxide source. I searched the other names, each one a tragedy. Each one explained away: natural causes, accidents, unattended deaths. Women who lived alone, died alone, and were found days later by the super. Always the super who found them. Different names in the reports over the years, but always the building superintendent making the discovery. Always on a Thursday morning. Always with the same story. Checking on them because they hadn't been seen, worried about their welfare. My left hand was writing again. He wasn't the first. The pattern went back decades. Different supers, same building, same type of victims. Elderly women or women living alone. Women without close family. Women whose deaths wouldn't raise questions. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old building sounded like footsteps. Every whistle of wind through the windows sounded like breathing. At 3 a.m., my left hand woke me with a single word. Listen. I lay still in the dark, straining to hear. At first, nothing but the usual sounds. The radiator's occasional clank, the hum of the refrigerator, the muffled music from the apartment below. Then I heard it. Scratching. Soft, rhythmic scratching coming from inside the walls. My left hand found a pen in the darkness. We're all still here. The scratching grew louder, spreading along the walls like something crawling through the spaces between. Not rats. The rhythm was too deliberate, too purposeful. I pressed my ear against the wall. The scratching formed patterns. Short, 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 long, long, short, 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 SOS. My left hand was writing frantically now, filling page after page in the dark. Let us speak. Let us tell. Let us warn. I turned on the lights, and the scratching stopped, but my hand kept writing, name after name, story after story. Women who'd lived in this building, women who'd died here, women whose voices had been silenced. By morning, I had 47 pages of their stories. The coffee shop below my apartment became my research center. Rosa, the new super, would find me there every morning, surrounded by library books and printouts, my laptop open to city archives and old newspaper databases. You writing a book about the building? She asked one morning, setting down a fresh mug of bean. There's dark roast. Something like that, I said. My left hand twitched, but stayed still. It had learned to be careful around others. Rosa lingered, wiping down the already clean table next to mine. You know, my grandmother used to live here, back in the 70s. Apartment 2B. My left hand spasmed. Margaret Fielding. 2B, 1987. She moved out kind of suddenly, Rosa continued. Never really said why, just packed up one day and left. Always wondered about that. Smart woman, I muttered. Rosa gave me a strange look but didn't press. After she left, my left hand wrote, She saw. She ran. The lucky ones always do. That evening, I decided to try something different. I'd been passive, just receiving messages. But what if I could direct the communication? I sat at my kitchen table with a fresh notebook and a question. Eleanor, are you the only one who can write through me? My left hand picked up the pen immediately. No. But I'm the strongest, the most recent. Can the others communicate directly? Through me, like a translator. Why my left hand? There was a pause, then, you listen. Most don't. And you're left-handed in your heart. I frowned. I'm right-handed. In this life. Before I could process that, my hand was writing again, faster now. The handwriting shifting slightly with each line. Different women, different voices, all filtered through Eleanor. Dorothy says the roses were her idea originally. She planted them in 1962, in pots on the fire escape. Management made her remove them. Susan wants you to know she fought. The scratches behind your radiator were hers. She almost made it to the door. Jennifer didn't trust the tea. Smart girl. But he found another way. Margaret. Margaret left because she saw him watching through the mail slot every Thursday morning, watching and waiting. The stories poured out. Decades of surveillance, patterns, escalation. The building itself seemed to be a hunting ground, passed down from one predator to the next. Not a conspiracy exactly, just opportunity. Men who sought positions of small power over vulnerable people. Men who recognized each other, wordlessly, the way predators do. My left hand cramped and released, then wrote, "The building remembers everything. We make sure of it." That's when I understood. The scratching in the walls wasn't just the women trying to communicate. They were keeping record. Every victim, every pattern, every close call. A history written in the spaces between walls, in scratches and whispers, and the faint smell of roses that sometimes drifted through the hallways. "How do I help you?" I asked. "Remember us, speak for us, make them see." The next morning, I started a blog, The Women of Rosewood Arms. I changed the building name and some details, but the stories I told exactly as they were written by my left hand. Each post featured one woman, one story, one pattern in the larger web. The blog went viral within a week. Not because people believed in ghostly handwriting, but because the patterns were so familiar. Women from around the country shared similar stories. Buildings with dark histories, supers with too many keys, deaths explained away too easily. My left hand wrote, "Yes, they see now. They're looking." But visibility came with a price. The first threat came through my apartment door. A note slipped under in the middle of the night. Block letters. Nothing traceable. Stop digging or join them. My left hand responded before I could even process the fear. Let them come. We're ready. I didn't feel ready. I felt exposed, vulnerable in exactly the way Eleanor and the others had been. But something had changed in the building. The scratching in the walls had evolved into something else. A presence. Protective. Watchful. Mrs. Goldman, from 3A, knocked on my door the next morning. She'd never visited before. "I read your blog," she said, clutching a plate of rugelach. "My Jenny, she lived here before me. Jennifer Santos. She was my niece." We sat at my kitchen table as she told me what the family had always suspected but could never prove. Jenny had been afraid in the weeks before she died. She'd talked about moving, about someone having keys, about Thursday mornings, but she'd sounded paranoid, stressed from her divorce, so they'd dismissed it. "She wasn't crazy," Mrs. Goldman whispered. "Was she?" My left hand took over, writing in Eleanor's perfect script. None of them were. Mrs. Goldman gasped, but didn't pull away. It's complicated," I said. She watched, fascinated, as my hand continued. Jenny fought hardest of all. Tell her family she wasn't afraid at the end. She was angry. That's good. Anger is stronger than fear. Mrs. Goldman left in tears, but they seemed like the good kind. Cathartic. Healing. Word spread through the building, quietly at first, then openly. Tenants I'd never spoken to began stopping me in the hallways, sharing stories. The woman in 2C whose mother had lived here in the 60s. The couple in 4B who'd always wondered about the scratches they'd painted over. Rosa, whose grandmother had escaped but never forgotten. The building was remembering, out loud. Finally. That Thursday, I woke to find my apartment door covered in roses. Fresh ones, dried ones, paper ones, even drawings of roses. A shrine that continued down the hallway. Offerings left by tenants who understood now what the roses meant. Resistance. Memory. Refusal to be forgotten. My left hand wrote, "They would have loved this." But we'd awakened something else too. That night, the power went out. Just our building. Just for an hour. Long enough for someone to try every door, testing locks, looking for weakness. Several tenants reported seeing a shadow in the hallway, hearing breathing outside their doors. Mike? Someone else? We never found out, because the building protected us. Mrs. Patterson from 3C told me later that she'd heard her doorknob turn, saw it begin to open. Her lock had been picked, but then the door slammed shut on its own, so hard the frame cracked. The intruder's yelp of pain echoed through the hallway. The couple in 4B reported that their windows had flown open just as someone tried to jimmy their lock, setting off their new alarm system. And me? I woke to find my left hand had written a single word on every surface it could reach while I slept. No. The walls, the windows, the mirror, even the ceiling where I'd apparently stood on a chair. No in Eleanor's perfect handwriting. A declaration and a barrier. The intruder fled, but not before leaving something behind. A key ring dropped in the stairwell. Old keys, dozens of them. Keys to our building, keys to others. A predator's collection. The police took it seriously this time. The keys led to storage units, to boxes of souvenirs, to connections that spanned decades and dozens of buildings across Portland. Not just Mike. A network. Men who shared tips, shared access, shared victims. The investigation is ongoing, but the building is different now. Safer. More alive. My left hand still writes, but the messages have changed. Recipes, mostly. Garden tips. Sometimes just contentment. The women are still here, but they're not trapped anymore. They're guardians, protectors, making sure that what happened to them doesn't happen to anyone else. Last week, a young woman viewed the empty apartment in 1C. Single, early 20s, new to Portland. The exact type of tenant who would have been vulnerable before. As Rosa showed her around, I watched from my doorway. The hallway filled with the faint scent of roses. The walls seemed to hum with approval. My left hand wrote without prompting. She'll be safe here, and she will be. We'll all make sure of it. The blog continues. I've interviewed experts, historians, housing advocates. We're pushing for better background checks for building employees, better oversight, better protection for vulnerable tenants. Eleanor's story, all their stories, are creating real change. But late at night, when the building settles and the roses on my fire escape release their fragrance into the darkness, I think about all the other buildings, all the other women, all the other voices that haven't found their writer yet. My left hand twitches sometimes when I pass other old buildings in Portland. Just a little. Just enough to make me wonder who else is waiting to be heard. The stories are everywhere. In scratched walls and strange dreams, in patterns too consistent to be coincidence, in the silence of women who died alone but shouldn't have. All they need is someone to listen. Someone whose hand is willing to tell their truth. Someone like you, perhaps. Have you ever felt your hand move without your permission? Ever found yourself writing words you didn't consciously choose? Ever wondered if maybe, just maybe, someone was trying to tell you something? Pay attention, listen, let them write. Because the most terrifying truth isn't that ghosts exist. It's that they've been trying to warn us all along, and we haven't been listening. If this story touched something deep in your memory, if you're thinking about that strange thing that happened that you've never been able to explain, leave a comment. Share your story, and remember to subscribe, because these voices deserve to be heard. Every single one of them, and check your locks, especially on Thursday mornings. Sleep tight. Story number 3. The first time I held one of those eggs, I felt it pulse against my palm. A steady rhythm, like holding a tiny heart wrapped in shell. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what really happened on my farm in rural Vermont, and why I can never eat eggs again. Before you settle in for the night, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because after you hear this, you're going to have questions. Lots of them, and trust me, the comments section is where things get really interesting. The story begins now. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and 3 months ago I inherited my grandmother's chicken farm outside Brattleboro, Vermont. 20 acres of rolling hills, an old red barn that creaked in the wind, and a chicken coop that housed about 30 hens. I just lost my marketing job in Boston, so the timing felt like fate. A fresh start, simple living, farm fresh eggs every morning. The first week was perfect. I'd wake up to roosters crowing, collect warm eggs from the nesting boxes, and sell them at the local farmers market for $5 a dozen. The locals loved them, said they had the richest yolks they'd ever seen, almost burgundy in color. It was on a Tuesday morning, early October, when everything changed. The air had that crisp autumn bite. Leaves crunched under my boots as I walked to the coop, but something felt off. The chickens were silent. Usually they'd be clucking and fussing, pecking at the ground. That morning, nothing. I pushed open the coop door. The smell hit me first. Not the usual earthy chicken smell, but something sweeter, like copper pennies mixed with vanilla. The hens sat perfectly still in their nesting boxes, 28 pairs of eyes watching me, not blinking, just watching. "Morning, girls," I said, trying to shake off the unease. My voice echoed strangely in the coop. I reached for the first egg in Henrietta's box, my favorite Rhode Island red. The egg was warm, but not just warm, it was pulsing. I almost dropped it. My hand jerked back instinctively, but curiosity won. I picked it up again, held it to my ear, and I heard it. Thump, 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 thump. A heartbeat, clear as day. I checked every single egg that morning. All 43 of them. Each one pulsed with its own rhythm. Some fast, some slow, some seemed to skip beats. I stood there in that silent coop, surrounded by watching hens, holding eggs that beat like hearts. My own heart hammered against my ribs. What do you do with something like that? Call a vet, the police? I did neither. Instead, I carefully placed all the eggs in my collection basket, went inside, and Googled chicken eggs with heartbeats. Nothing. Not a single result that matched what I was experiencing. I stored them in the refrigerator. All 43 figured the cold might, I don't know, stop whatever was happening, make them normal again. But when I checked an hour later, they were still beating. Slower in the cold, but steady, persistent. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those hens staring at me, unblinking. I heard phantom heartbeats in the walls, in my pillow, everywhere. Around 3 a.m., I gave up and went to the kitchen, made myself some tea, sat at the table and stared at the refrigerator. The eggs were calling to me, not with words, but with a pull I couldn't explain, like they needed me to understand something. I opened the fridge. The cartons sat there. Innocent looking, but I could see them moving slightly. 43 tiny tremors in perfect shells. I picked one up, held it in both hands. The shell felt different now, softer, like skin instead of calcium. The heartbeat was stronger, faster, and then, I swear, I felt it respond to my touch. The rhythm changed when I held it tighter, slowed when I relaxed my grip. They were alive. Whatever was inside those eggs, it wasn't a normal chick. The next morning, I found Mrs. Henderson at my door. She ran the farmer's market, had been buying eggs from my grandmother for 20 years. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her weathered face looked troubled. "Sarah, honey," she said, shifting her weight nervously. "I need to ask you something about the eggs you sold last week." My stomach dropped. Is something wrong with them?" She pulled out her phone, showed me a video. It was grainy, taken in someone's kitchen. A woman cracking an egg into a pan. But when the shell broke, no yolk spilled out. Instead, something small and red tumbled onto the skillet. It pulsed twice, then dissolved into black liquid. "That's from the Jacobson family," Mrs. Henderson said quietly. "They bought a dozen from you on Saturday, every single egg, the same thing." I couldn't speak. My mouth went dry. "Now, I'm not saying you did anything wrong," she continued, "but folks are talking, saying maybe you should get those chickens checked. Make sure they're not eating something unnatural." After she left, I went straight to the coop. The hens were active now, pecking and clucking like normal chickens, like nothing had happened. I searched every inch of their area. The feed looked fine, the water was clean, nothing seemed out of place. But then I noticed the ground near the back fence. It was different. The grass was greener there, too green for October, and it grew in a perfect circle, about 6 feet wide. I knelt down, ran my fingers through it. The grass felt warm, alive in a way that made my skin crawl. I started digging. Don't ask me why. Instinct, maybe. Or that same pull I'd felt from the eggs. About a foot down, my fingers hit something smooth. I brushed away the dirt. It was white, curved, bone-like, but not quite bone. Too smooth, too perfect. I kept digging. The object was massive. The more I uncovered, the less sense it made. It looked organic, but manufactured, like something between a seashell and a spacecraft. The surface had a subtle pattern, swirls and dots that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. The chickens gathered behind me, all 28 of them, standing in a perfect semicircle, watching. Their silence was deafening. I should have stopped digging, should have covered it back up and called someone, anyone, but I didn't. I kept going until I'd exposed the whole thing. It was about the size of a compact car, egg-shaped, ironically enough. The surface was warm, and I could feel it humming, a vibration that went straight through my bones. Then I saw the crack, a hairline fracture running along one side. Fresh dirt had fallen into it, which meant it was recent. Something had broken out, or broken in. The chickens moved closer. Their eyes weren't normal chicken eyes anymore. They were too intelligent, too knowing. Henrietta, my favorite, stepped forward. She tilted her head and made a sound I'd never heard a chicken make. It was almost like words. Syllables that weren't quite human, but weren't quite animal either. I scrambled backward, fell on my ass in the dirt. The chickens didn't react. They just kept staring at that buried object, waiting. That night, I boarded up the coop, locked the chickens inside. I know it sounds cruel, but I was terrified. Those weren't my chickens anymore. They were something else. Something that laid eggs with heartbeats and spoke in almost words. I sat in my kitchen with a baseball bat, watching the coop through the window. Around midnight, I saw lights, soft blue-white glows coming from between the boards. The entire coop pulsed with that light, like a giant heartbeat. I almost called 911, had the phone in my hand. But what would I say? Help, my chickens are glowing? They'd think I was insane. Or worse, they'd come investigate and find that thing buried in my yard. So I waited, watched. The lights pulsed for hours, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, and I could hear them, the chickens. They were singing, if you could call it that. A low, harmonious hum that made my teeth ache. Dawn came eventually. The lights faded, the singing stopped. I waited another hour before approaching the coop. My hands shook as I removed the boards. The chickens were gone, all 28 of them, vanished. But the eggs remained, hundreds of them. They covered every surface, nested in the straw, balanced on the perches, stacked in impossible pyramids. all of them pulsing, all of them warm, and in the center of the coop, written in what looked like blood, but smelled like that copper vanilla scent, were words, "They need mothers." I spent the next 3 days in a haze. Didn't leave the house. Didn't answer the door when neighbors knocked. I just sat at my kitchen table, staring at those words photographed on my phone. They need mothers. What did that mean? Mothers for what? The eggs in my refrigerator had changed. The shells were now translucent, like looking through frosted glass. Inside each one, shadows moved. Shapes that weren't quite formed yet, but were becoming something. The heartbeats were stronger. Some had developed rhythm patterns, like Morse code, like they were trying to communicate. On the 4th night, I cracked. I needed answers, so I did the unthinkable. I took one of the eggs, the one with the strongest heartbeat, and carefully cracked it into a glass bowl. What came out wasn't yolk or white. It was a tiny, perfect sphere of what looked like dark mercury. It hovered an inch above the bowl, spinning slowly. And inside that sphere, I saw things, images, memories that weren't mine. I saw the object in my yard, but intact, gleaming. I saw it opening. I saw my chickens approaching it. Curious, I saw them change, not all at once, but slowly. Their eyes growing sharper, their movements more deliberate, their understanding deepening. I saw them laying the first changed eggs, saw them watching me collect them, saw them waiting. The sphere suddenly dropped into the bowl with a splash. The liquid spread, forming patterns, words, different languages flashing by too fast to read. Then, finally, in English, "We are the first. Others will follow. Prepare them." The liquid evaporated. The bowl was empty. But the message burned in my mind. I went to the coop, had to see that buried object again. But when I got there, the hole was empty. The massive, egg-shaped thing was gone. Only a perfectly smooth depression remained. Like a mold. Like something had been incubating there and finally hatched. That's when I heard the humming. Coming from the woods behind my property. The same harmonious sound the chickens had made. But louder. Layered. Like a choir. I followed the sound. I know, stupid move. Every horror movie warns against this. But I had to know. The humming led me deeper into the woods than I'd ever gone. The trees here were older, taller. The canopy so thick that barely any moonlight filtered through. The humming stopped. In the silence I heard breathing. Not mine. Something larger. I turned slowly and saw them. My chickens. All 28. But they were different now. Bigger. Their feathers shimmed with that same blue-white light. Their eyes were definitely not chicken eyes anymore. They looked ancient. Wise. Sad. Henrietta stepped forward. When she opened her beak, words came out. Real words. Her voice was like wind chimes mixed with gravel. "You were chosen, Sarah, just as your grandmother was chosen, just as her mother before her." I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. "The eggs are gifts," Henrietta continued. "Seeds of change. What grows from them will save your species, or transform it. The choice is yours." "I don't understand," I managed to whisper. "You will. When the mothers come, you will." The chickens turned as one and walked deeper into the woods. The light from their feathers faded, leaving me in darkness. I stumbled back home, my mind reeling. The next morning, the eggs in my refrigerator had multiplied. They filled every shelf, every drawer, all translucent, all beating, all waiting. And on my doorstep, I found a note, written in that same copper-scented substance. "The mothers arrive tomorrow. Choose wisely." I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I sat in my living room, baseball bat across my lap, watching the darkness outside. The eggs in the refrigerator hummed in harmony, a sound that seemed to sync with my own heartbeat. At exactly 3:33 a.m., they came. Not in ships or lights in the sky like you'd expect. They came as women, 7 of them, walking out of the woods in simple white dresses, barefoot despite the cold October ground. Their skin had a subtle shimmer, like pearl dust. Their eyes were too large, too dark, but otherwise they looked human. They knocked politely. 3 soft raps that echoed through the house. I opened the door. What else could I do? Hide until they broke in? Run and leave this mess for someone else? No. This was my inheritance, my burden, my choice. Sarah Mitchell, the tallest one, said. Her voice was like Henrietta's, but smoother, more practiced. We've been waiting so long to meet you. I let them in. They moved like water, flowing around furniture, never bumping into anything. They gathered in my kitchen, drawn to the refrigerator. One of them placed her hand on the door and smiled. So many, she whispered. You've taken good care of them. What are they? I asked. My voice was steadier than I felt. The future, another replied. Your species stands at a crossroads. Climate change, war, disease. You're dying, slowly but surely. We offer evolution. She opened the refrigerator. The eggs glowed brighter, their heartbeats accelerating. She picked one up, cradled it like a baby. These contain genetic bridges, harmonious combinations of your DNA and ours. The children born from these eggs will be immune to radiation, to most diseases. They'll live longer, think faster, feel deeper. They'll be human, but more. And if I say no? I asked. The women exchanged glances. The tall one spoke again. Then we leave. Find another farm, another family line. Your grandmother said yes, 50 years ago. That's why your chickens were special. Why the land was prepared, but the choice is always yours. My grandmother, she knew? She was one of the first mothers. Her daughter, your aunt, who died young, was from an egg, partially. The process wasn't perfected then. We've learned much since. My Aunt Clara, who died at 7 from a fever no doctor could explain, who my mother said was special, different, who talked to animals and predicted weather and drew symbols that hurt to look at. Show me, I said. Show me what they'll become. The tall woman nodded. She took the egg she was holding and pressed it against her chest. The shell dissolved, absorbed into her skin. Her eyes rolled back, and for a moment, I saw her true form. Too many limbs, too many eyes, beautiful and terrible and completely alien. Then she was human-looking again, but her stomach had swelled, pregnant, impossibly fast. 9 days, she said. In 9 days I'll give birth to the first of the new generation. If you agree, you'll help us find more mothers, women who are ready, willing. The eggs will only quicken for those who truly consent. And my chickens? They've served their purpose. They're free now. Wild things with wild wisdom. They'll live in the deep woods, laying eggs for creatures that need evolution too. Your world is changing, Sarah. We're just trying to help it change into something that can survive. I thought about climate change, about the wars on the news, about the pandemics and the famines and the slow collapse of everything. I thought about my Aunt Clara, about my grandmother keeping this secret for 50 years. What do you need me to do? I asked. The women smiled, all 7 of them. The same smile. The eggs in the refrigerator sang, a sound like hope and heartbreak mixed together. They taught me that night how to read the heartbeats, how to match eggs to mothers, how to prepare the soil for more landings, how to recognize women who carried the genetic markers, descendants of previous attempts throughout history. By dawn, I understood my role. I was a shepherd, a matchmaker between species, a keeper of evolutionary keys. The 7 mothers stayed in my barn. Over the next days, their bellies grew. I could see the children moving inside, not quite human shapes, but close. Getting closer, I put out word carefully, quietly, through online forums for women struggling with infertility, through whisper networks of those who felt different, out of place. Ready for change, they came one by one, drawn by something they couldn't name. I showed them the eggs, explained what I knew. Most ran, but some held the eggs and wept, felt the heartbeats and recognized them, took them home and waited. 9 days after the mothers arrived, the first child was born. I was there, helped deliver him. He looked human, perfect fingers and toes, but his eyes held galaxies, and when he cried, plants grew. Flowers bloomed from seeds that had been dormant for years. The other births followed. 7 children, all different, all magnificent, all terrifying in their potential. The mothers left that night, walked back into the woods and vanished. But the children stayed. Their human mothers, the women who'd taken eggs, they raised them, loved them, protected them. I still have eggs, hundreds now. They appear each morning where the coop used to be, nestled in grass that's too green for any season. I match them to mothers, guide the process, watch the children grow. Some nights I see my chickens in the woods. They're the size of horses now. Their feathers trail light like comet tails. Henrietta still visits sometimes, tells me about the changes coming, the world that's being born. I'm not scared anymore, not really, because I've seen what's coming, held tomorrow in my hands, felt its heartbeat. The eggs are still calling, still waiting, still beating with promise and possibility. And somewhere out there, maybe in your town, women are waking up to cravings they can't explain, dreams of shells breaking, children with stars in their eyes. The transformation has begun. The question is, when they come to your door, when you feel that pull towards something impossible, will you say yes? Will you be a mother to tomorrow? I still live on the farm, still tend the eggs, still guide the process. If you've felt the calling, if your dreams have been strange lately, find me. The eggs know their mothers. They've been waiting for you. But choose carefully, because once you hold one, once you feel that heartbeat sync with yours, there's no going back. You'll be part of something bigger, something necessary, something that might save us all, or change us beyond recognition. The children are walking now, talking, learning. They look like us, but they're not us. They're what comes next, what has to come next, and they're beautiful. So before you go to sleep tonight, before you close your eyes and drift away, ask yourself, if you found an egg tomorrow, warm and pulsing with life, would you have the courage to crack it open, to let the future in, to become a mother to a new world? Sweet dreams. And if you hear humming in the dark, if you feel your heart skip to match a rhythm not your own, remember my story. Remember you have a choice. The eggs are waiting. We all are. Tell me in the comments, have you felt it? The calling? The pull towards something you can't explain? Because if you have, we need to talk. Subscribe and hit that notification bell. There's so much more to share, so many more stories from the mothers, from the children. This is just the beginning. The heartbeats never stop. They're getting stronger, and they're spreading. Story number 4. The first bobby pin appeared on a Tuesday morning. Black metal against white tile, gleaming like a tiny question mark on my bathroom floor. I picked it up, turned it over in my fingers and tossed it in the trash without a second thought. Probably fell out of someone's pocket at the coffee shop, got stuck to my shoe. These things happen. But if you're still listening to this, if you haven't clicked away yet, then maybe you already know. Maybe you found them too. Those little metal pins in places they shouldn't be. And maybe, just maybe, you're hoping I'll tell you it's nothing. I wish I could. Before I tell you what happened, before this story really begins, I need you to understand something. I'm a creature of habit. My morning routine is sacred. Alarm at 6:15. Shower, coffee, news podcast during my commute to the accounting firm downtown. I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment in Milwaukee. Been there 3 years now. I keep my hair buzzed short, number 2 guard, every 3 weeks at Tony's Barbershop on Water Street. I tell you this because details matter, patterns matter. And when patterns break, that's when you should worry. All right, here's where the story actually starts. That Tuesday morning with the first bobby pin. I'd already forgotten about it by lunch. But Wednesday morning, there was another one. This time on my kitchen counter, right next to the coffee maker. Same type, basic black bobby pin. The kind you can buy 100 of for $3 at any drugstore. I stood there in my boxers and t-shirt, holding my empty coffee mug, staring at this little piece of metal like it had personally offended me. My apartment building is secure. Key fob entry. My door has 2 deadbolts. I installed the second one myself. Nobody had been in my apartment. Okay, I said out loud to nobody. Weird. I threw it away and made my coffee. But something felt off. You know that feeling when you can't remember if you locked your car? That nagging sensation that something's not quite right? That's how I felt all day. Carol from accounting asked if I was feeling okay. I told her I was fine, just tired. Thursday morning, 3 bobby pins, 1 on my nightstand, 1 in the shower. 1 balanced perfectly on top of my toothbrush. Now I was genuinely freaked out. I called in sick to work, something I never do. Spent the morning checking every window, every possible entry point. Nothing. I even looked up at the ceiling, wondering if someone could come through the vents like in those action movies. Ridiculous, I know, but when you can't explain something, your mind goes to strange places. I decided to set up a test. I took a piece of Scotch tape and placed it across the bottom of my front door, low enough that anyone entering would break it. Did the same with the windows. Then I went to Best Buy and bought a security camera. Nothing fancy, just a little wireless thing I could monitor from my phone. That night, I barely slept. Every little sound made me jump. The ice maker in the fridge, a car door slamming outside, my upstairs neighbor's cat running around at 3 a.m. But when morning came, the tape was intact. I checked the camera footage. 8 hours of absolutely nothing. Except Friday morning, 7 bobby pins. They were everywhere, arranged in a perfect line on my bathroom sink. And the tape on my door? Still unbroken. I called my sister Emma in Chicago. She's always been the rational one in the family. Maybe you're sleepwalking, she suggested. Buying them in your sleep? I haven't sleepwalked since I was 12. And even if I was, where would I get them? I don't own any bobby pins, never have. Well, they're coming from somewhere, David. Objects don't just materialize. She was right, of course. But that didn't help me figure out where they were coming from. I decided to stay awake that night, all night. I made a pot of coffee, queued up some podcasts, and settled into my living room chair with a clear view of both the hallway and the front door. Midnight passed, then 1, then 2. My eyelids felt like they weighed 50 pounds. The podcast voices blurred into white noise. Just for a second, I told myself. I'll just close my eyes for a second. I woke up at 6:15, in my bed, covers pulled up to my chin, and on my pillow, right next to my head, 13 bobby pins arranged in a perfect circle. The weekend was a blur of paranoia and research. I Googled everything I could think of. Bobby pins appearing in apartment. Someone leaving bobby pins. Bobby pin stalker. Nothing useful came up. Just hairstyling tutorials and bulk buying options. I installed more cameras. One in every room. Even the bathroom. Privacy be damned. I changed my locks, even though there was no sign anyone had used the old ones. I bought a baseball bat and kept it next to my bed. I know how that sounds. Grown man afraid of hair accessories. But you have to understand, it wasn't about the bobby pins themselves. It was about what they represented. Someone, or something, was in my space. My safe space. And I couldn't figure out how. Monday came too soon. I'd called in sick Thursday and Friday. I couldn't miss more work. So I showered, shaved, put on my shirt and tie, and tried to pretend everything was normal. But when I opened my car door, my heart nearly stopped. The entire driver's seat was covered in bobby pins, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all black, all identical, all perfectly arranged in overlapping circles like metal fish scales. I stood there in the parking garage, breath misting in the cold Milwaukee morning, and I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because what else could I do? I was losing it. I had to be. I swept them all into a garbage bag, threw it in the dumpster, and drove to work, but I couldn't focus. Numbers swam on my computer screen. I kept finding myself staring at nothing, wondering if there were bobby pins appearing in my apartment right now, wondering if they were spelling out messages I was too stupid to read. That's when Carol rolled her chair over to my desk. "Okay, what's going on with you? And don't say you're fine. You look like you haven't slept in days." I almost told her everything, almost. But how do you explain something like this without sounding completely insane? So I gave her a watered-down version. Strange items appearing in my apartment. Probably a prank. Maybe a stalker. She frowned, tapping her pen against her desk. "You know what this reminds me of? My cousin had something similar happen. Turned out it was the landlord. He was coming in when tenants were at work, going through their stuff. They caught him on a hidden camera. I have cameras. There's nothing on them. Maybe they're hacked? I don't know. David, this sounds serious. You should call the police." I told her I would. I didn't. Because that night, everything changed. I got home around 6. The apartment looked normal, no bobby pins anywhere. I checked every room, every surface. Nothing. For a brief moment, I felt relief. Maybe it was over. Maybe whoever was doing this had gotten bored. I ordered Chinese food, watched some mindless TV, took a shower. Normal evening, normal life. I was starting to feel silly about the whole thing. The human mind can play tricks, especially when you're stressed. Tax season was coming up. Maybe I was having some kind of breakdown. I went to bed at 10:30, checked the locks twice, watched the camera feeds on my phone until my eyes burned. All quiet, all normal. I must have fallen asleep around 11. And then I heard it. A sound like metal on metal. Soft. Rhythmic. Like someone filing their nails, but metallic. I lay there frozen, ears straining. The sound was coming from inside my apartment, inside my bedroom. I reached for the baseball bat, fingers trembling. The sound stopped. Silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. Then, a whisper, so quiet I almost thought I imagined it. "I need them back." I shot up in bed, swinging the bat wildly. "Who's there? I'm calling the police." Nothing. Nobody. I fumbled for the light switch, blinked in the sudden brightness. My bedroom was empty, exactly as I'd left it, except on my dresser, where I keep my wallet and keys, a single bobby pin, standing upright, balanced on its curved end like a tiny metal sculpture. As I watched, it fell over. The sound it made hitting the wood was impossibly loud. Like a gunshot, like a scream, like breaking glass. I stumbled backward, tripped over my own feet, went down hard. The bat clattered away across the floor. When I looked again, the dresser was covered in bobby pins, dozens of them. But they weren't just scattered randomly. They were arranged, spelled out. She needs them back. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, didn't even try. I sat on my couch with every light in the apartment on, baseball bat across my lap, watching those words on my dresser. She needs them back. By morning, they had rearranged themselves. Find her. I called in sick again, didn't care if they fired me. I had bigger problems. I needed answers, real answers, not Google searches or rational explanations. Something was happening in my apartment, something impossible, and I was done pretending otherwise. I started with the building manager, Mrs. Chen. She'd been running the place for 15 years. If anyone would know about strange occurrences, it would be her. I found her in the basement laundry room, folding a massive pile of unclaimed clothes. Bobby pins. She looked at me over her glasses. Can't say I've heard that one before. We had a ghost sighting in 3B once. Turned out to be a carbon monoxide leak. You checked your detector lately? I had. First thing I'd done. But I appreciated the practical suggestion. What about previous tenants? I asked. Anyone unusual live in my unit before me? She thought for a moment, fingers still working through the laundry. Let's see, 4F. You've been there 3 years. Before you was that young man, Marcus something. Only stayed 6 months. And before him, she paused. Her hands stopped moving. Before him was Sarah. Sarah Winters, lovely girl, quiet, kept to herself. What happened to her? Mrs. Chen resumed folding, but slower now. Careful. She passed away. In the apartment, actually. I'm sorry. I should have disclosed that when you moved in, but it was natural causes. Heart condition. She was only 28. Tragic, really. My mouth felt dry. Did she have long hair? Oh yes, beautiful red hair down to her waist. Always wore it up in these elaborate styles, bobby pins everywhere. I remember because I had to clean them all out after she died. Found hundreds of them, in the couch cushions, under the bed, stuck in the carpet, like she shed them or something. I thanked Mrs. Chen and practically ran back to my apartment. This was insane. Ghosts weren't real. Dead people didn't come back for their hair accessories. There had to be another explanation. But when I opened my door, I knew there wasn't. My living room looked like a bobby pin factory had exploded. They covered every surface, the floor, the furniture, hanging from the ceiling fan, stuck in the walls like tiny metal insects. And in the center of it all, on my coffee table, they spelled out a message. April 15th, bedroom closet, top shelf, please. April 15th, that was 3 days away. The message felt different this time, less demanding, almost desperate. I picked my way through the metal minefield to my bedroom. The closet was just a standard sliding door affair. I kept my winter coats in there, some boxes of tax documents. Nothing special. I'd never really looked at the top shelf. It was too high to reach without a stepladder. I dragged a chair over and climbed up. The shelf was dusty, empty except for... Wait, in the back corner. A shoebox, not mine. I pulled it down, nearly fell off the chair in my haste. The box was light. Inside, a manila envelope. And inside that, hair. A long braid of red hair, tied at both ends with faded ribbon, and wrapped around it, secured with what else? Dozens of bobby pins. There was a note. Handwriting I didn't recognize. Feminine. Careful. If you find this, please. April 15th is my birthday. I just wanted something of me to stay, to be remembered. I'm sorry if I scared you. I didn't mean to. I just wanted them back. The pins, they were my grandmother's. The only thing of hers I had. I'm so sorry. Sarah. I sat on my bedroom floor, holding this braid of a dead woman's hair, and I felt like the world's biggest jerk. She wasn't trying to harm me. She was just lost, trying to find her way back to something that mattered to her. I looked around at the thousands of bobby pins covering my apartment. "Sarah?" I said out loud, feeling ridiculous but doing it anyway. "I'll help you. I'll figure something out. Just maybe ease up on the pins. I'm running out of garbage bags." The apartment was silent, but I swear the air felt lighter somehow. That night, no new bobby pins appeared for the first time in over a week. I slept through until morning. April 15th came faster than I expected. I'd done my research, found Sarah's obituary online. No family listed, no services held, just a small notice that she'd passed, survived by no one. It broke my heart a little. I'd gathered all the bobby pins, every single one. It took 3 full days, but I found them all. Filled 2 entire boxes. I'd bought new ribbon, red like the one on her braid. I'd even found a nice wooden box at an antique store, something better than a shoebox to keep them in. But I still didn't know what to do. Where do you bring ghost bobby pins? What do you do with the hair of someone who died alone? The morning of April 15th, I woke up to find a single bobby pin on my pillow. But this time, it didn't frighten me. It felt like a reminder. Today's the day. Don't forget. I called in sick one last time. Told them I had a family emergency. In a way, I suppose I did. I drove to Forest Home Cemetery. It's one of the oldest in Milwaukee, full of elaborate headstones and old trees. I'd found Sarah's grave location in their online database, Section 43, Row L, Plot 27. It was a small headstone, just her name and dates. No inscription, no flowers, no sign anyone had visited in the 3 years since she'd been buried. I stood there in the April morning chill, holding my box of bobby pins and wondering what the hell I was doing. This was crazy. I was bringing hair accessories to a ghost. If anyone saw me, "You came." I nearly jumped out of my skin. A woman stood beside me, elderly, wearing a long coat despite the mild weather. She had the kind of face that had been beautiful once, sharp cheekbones and bright eyes. "I'm sorry?" She smiled, and it was sad and knowing all at once. "You're the one from 4F, the one who's been finding Sarah's pins." I stared at her. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I've been leaving them." My brain short-circuited. "You... what?" She pulled something from her pocket, a bobby pin, black metal, identical to the thousands I'd been finding. "Not all of them," she clarified. "Just the first few, to get your attention. The rest, well, that was Sarah. She always was dramatic." The woman's eyes glistened. "I'm her neighbor." Was her neighbor, 4G, right next door to you now, Mrs. Patterson. "I don't understand. Why would you—" "Because she asked me to." Mrs. Patterson looked down at the headstone. "The night before she died, she knocked on my door. We'd barely spoken before, just hallway pleasantries. But that night she looked so scared, so young. She knew something was wrong with her heart, could feel it. She gave me a box of bobby pins, her grandmother's, and asked me to keep them safe. Said they were all she had left of her family." She paused, pulled her coat tighter. "I promised I would. But after she died, I couldn't bear to keep them. Seeing them made me so sad. So I put them in storage, tried to forget. But this year, on what would have been her birthday, I felt guilty. She'd asked me to do one thing, one simple thing, and I'd failed. So I thought, maybe if I left a few in the apartment, like breadcrumbs, maybe someone would help me figure out what to do. But the messages, I asked, the words spelled out, the whispers? Mrs. Patterson looked at me strangely. What messages? I only left a few pins, maybe 7 or 8 total. Just dropped them through the gap under your door when you were at work. I felt cold despite the morning sun. If she'd only left a few, then who had left the hundreds of others? Who had spelled out the messages? Who had whispered in the dark? I looked down at the grave, at the simple stone marking where a lonely young woman lay, and I understood. She did the rest, I said quietly. Sarah did the rest. Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly. I think she just wanted them back. Her grandmother's pins, the only connection she had left. I knelt down and opened the wooden box I'd brought, started placing the bobby pins around her headstone, one by one, making a circle, making a pattern, making something beautiful out of something ordinary. Mrs. Patterson knelt beside me, helped me arrange them. 2 strangers decorating a grave with hair accessories on a Thursday morning. If anyone had seen us, they would have thought we were crazy. When we finished, the grave looked different, less forgotten, less alone. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson whispered, whether to me or to Sarah. I wasn't sure. We stood there for a moment in silence. Then Mrs. Patterson reached into her pocket again, pulled out one last bobby pin. This one was actually hers. From that night, I kept it. I don't know why. Maybe you should. I took it, turned it over in my fingers. It looked exactly like all the others, but somehow it felt different, heavier, more real. I'll keep it, I said, to remember. Mrs. Patterson smiled, a real smile this time. She would have liked that. We walked back to our cars together, made small talk about the weather, about the building, about anything except what had just happened. Because some things don't need words. That was 3 months ago. I still live in 4F. Still keep my hair buzzed short. Still go through the same morning routine. But now there's one small addition. Every morning, I check my nightstand, where I keep that single bobby pin, Sarah's bobby pin, just to make sure it's still there. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, I find it moved, turned slightly, catching the light differently, like someone's been holding it, remembering what it felt like to pin up long red hair, remembering what it felt like to be alive. I don't mind. In fact, I find it oddly comforting. We all just want to be remembered, to know that something of us remains, even if it's just a bobby pin, even if it's just a ghost of who we used to be. So, if you've made it this far, if you're still listening, I have a question for you. Have you ever found something that didn't belong? Something small and ordinary but impossibly out of place? And did you throw it away without a second thought? Maybe you shouldn't. Maybe someone's trying to tell you something. Maybe they just want to be found. And maybe, just maybe, if you're very quiet and very still, you can hear them whisper, "Thank you for remembering." But here's the thing I haven't told you. The thing that keeps me awake some nights. Yesterday morning, I found something new on my nightstand. Not a bobby pin, a hair tie, blue elastic, the kind with no metal clasp. I live alone, I have short hair, and Mrs. Patterson moved away last month. So tell me, in the comments, what do you think that means? And what should I do when I start finding more? Because I have a feeling Sarah wasn't the only one who wanted to be remembered. And I really need to know, am I the only one this happens to? Actually, wait, before you go, before you click away to another video, there's something else. Something I didn't want to tell you because, honestly, it scares me more than everything else that happened. Remember when I said I kept that one bobby pin? Sarah's bobby pin, the one Mrs. Patterson gave me at the cemetery. Well, 2 weeks after all this ended, I decided to look into its history. I don't know why. Maybe I was just curious. Maybe I needed closure. Or maybe something is pulling me to learn more. I went to the Milwaukee Public Library. They have old city directories, genealogy records, that sort of thing. I wanted to know about Sarah's grandmother, the original owner of those bobby pins. The librarian, a young guy named Jerome, was incredibly helpful. We spent 3 hours going through records, birth certificates, death certificates, census data from the 1940s and 50s, and we found her. Sarah's grandmother, Margaret Winters, born 1923. Died. This is where it gets strange. She died on April 15, 1959, the same date as Sarah's birthday, exactly 40 years before Sarah was born. Jerome pulled up the newspaper archives from that week. Small mention on page 7, local woman found dead in apartment. The details were sparse, but what was there made my blood run cold. Margaret Winters, age 36, found dead in her apartment at 1247 North Water Street. Natural causes. Heart condition. She was discovered by her neighbor when she failed to show up for work. No family, no services held. Sound familiar? But here's the thing that really got me. The thing that made Jerome go pale when he read it out loud. The apartment where Margaret died? It's my building. Different numbering system back then, but when we cross-reference the old city maps, she died in what's now apartment 4F. My apartment. Sarah's apartment. Jerome looked at me over his glasses. That's quite a coincidence. But it wasn't a coincidence, I knew that. 2 women, grandmother and granddaughter, dying of the same condition, in the same apartment, 40 years apart, and those bobby pins passed down from one to the other, like some kind of inheritance, some kind of curse. I left the library in a daze, walked the 12 blocks back to my apartment building, stood outside looking up at my window, 4th floor, corner unit. How many others had lived there? How many others had died there? When I got back to my apartment, something was different. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Everything was in its place. No bobby pins, no messages, but the air felt expectant, like the moment before a thunderstorm, like something holding its breath. I found it in the bedroom, on the wall behind my dresser. I'd never moved the dresser before. Why would I? But something made me pull it away from the wall that day. There were names, carved into the plaster. Dozens of them, all women. Margaret Winters, 1959. Eleanor Vance, 1967. Catherine Mills, 1971. Rebecca Torres, 1978. Diana Chen, 1985. Monica Thompson, 1990. Sarah Winters, 1999. Jennifer Adams, 2008. Lisa Park, 2015. Amanda Morrison, 2021. Some I recognized from my research. Others were new, but the pattern was clear. Every few years, someone died in this apartment. Always women, always young, always alone. And at the bottom of the list, freshly carved, still dusting plaster onto the floor, David Mills, 2024. That's my name. That's this year. I stood there staring at my name on that wall, and I laughed. Actually laughed. Because what else could I do? Was I supposed to believe I was going to die because my name appeared on a wall? Was I supposed to flee my apartment because of some supernatural hit list? But then I noticed something else. The dates. They weren't random. March 3rd, June 6th, September 9th, December 12th, and of course, April 15th. All multiples of 3, all following a pattern. Today, as I record this, is July 6th, exactly 3 months after I found Sarah's bobby pins. Exactly 3 months after this all started. And this morning, I found something new on my nightstand. Not a bobby pin, not a hair tie, a pill bottle, old-fashioned brown glass. The label faded but still readable. Digitalis for M. Winters. Take as directed for heart palpitations. Margaret's heart medication. From 1959. Inside, a single white pill. Still intact after all these years. Impossible, but there it was, and underneath the bottle, a note. Same feminine handwriting as Sarah's. It doesn't have to hurt. We're all waiting. We're all here. Just take the medicine and come home. I haven't taken it. Of course I haven't taken it. I'm not insane. But sometimes at night, when I can't sleep, when I can hear them whispering through the walls, all those lonely women who died in this place, I hold that bottle, feel its weight. Wonder what it would be like to not be alone anymore, because that's the real horror, isn't it? Not the dying, but the living, alone, forgotten, with no one to leave your bobby pins to. Mrs. Patterson was wrong. Sarah wasn't trying to recover her grandmother's pins. She was trying to pass them on, to continue the tradition, to make sure someone remembered. And now I have them. One single bobby pin, waiting on my nightstand, waiting for... what? For me to die? For me to find someone to pass it to? For me to break the cycle? I don't know. I honestly don't know. But I'll tell you this, if you're listening, really listening, check your nightstand tomorrow morning. Check your bathroom counter. Check that place where you always put your keys. Because maybe, just maybe, you'll find something that doesn't belong. Something small, something ordinary, something impossible. And when you do, remember this story. Remember my name. David Mills, apartment 4F. The last name on the wall. For now, remember us, all of us. The forgotten ones, the lonely ones, the ones who died holding on to the only things that mattered, even if it was just a bobby pin. Sweet dreams. Oh, and one more thing. That blue hair tie I mentioned, I found out who it belonged to. The next name that's supposed to appear on the wall. She's already here. Already waiting. Already watching. Her name is Claire. She just moved into 4G, Mrs. Patterson's old apartment. She has the most beautiful, long brown hair, and yesterday, I saw her drop a bobby pin in the hallway. The cycle continues, whether we want it to or not. But here's my question for you, and I really need you to answer in the comments. If you knew your name was on a wall somewhere, if you knew your time was marked, would you run? Would you fight? Or would you stay and try to save the next person? Because Claire seems nice. She smiles when we pass in the hallway. She doesn't deserve this. None of us do. But deserve's got nothing to do with it. The bobby pins don't care. The apartment doesn't care. The pattern doesn't care. It just continues. 3 by 3 by 3. Forever and ever. Unless someone breaks it. Maybe that someone is me. Maybe that someone is you. Maybe that's why you're still listening. Sweet dreams, and check your nightstand.